Thank you for joining the Resilient Cyber Show. My name is Chris Hughes, and today I'm joined by Jeevan Singh. Jeevan, thanks for being here.
I'm very excited to be here. We've been chatting for so long, Chris. It's nice to finally connect and speak about AppSec.
Yeah, likewise. I've been following your content easily a couple of years now, like, talks you've given or just things you've been talking about on LinkedIn posts and things like that. But for folks that don't know you and haven't been kind of stalking your content like me, who is Jeevan and how did you get to where you are in your career right now?
Yeah, great question. I think a lot of my security fascination started when I was in university, and I had a friend there that was uh, the type that was a little bit not on the straight and narrow path in general. And I would pick him up on my way to school, and one day he pulled me aside. He's like, "Jeevan, look what I've done." And I'm like, "Okay." Came in, checked out his computer. He had cracked about a third of the engineering students and professors' passwords. And that terrified me. I'm like, I'm going to be part of that list at some point. And I asked him, how did you exactly do this? He walked me through it. And that always I've always had that itch to really deeply understand security. So I got my degree, worked for a software company, and then worked for another one. And at the next one, it was the very early days of e-commerce, and we were getting some interesting stuff like in our logs. They were like, how does this individual hit this particular endpoint, or how did they get this information? And then next company I worked at, anytime there was a pen test, I would just put my hand up and say, I'm fixing all these vulnerabilities. And slowly but surely, I ended up on the security side of things. And from there, it's been a nonstop roller coaster of going the right direction. So I've been really enjoying learning how to scale security and really challenging security teams as well as engineering teams to just do better. How do we actually produce more with less?
Yeah, honestly, I'm not gonna lie. I've been doing security, almost 20 years myself, and I haven't run into many people like you who are raising their hand and saying, "Hey, I want to fix all the vulnerabilities." Usually, people are like, "Oh, I don't want," especially after a while, they're like, "Hey, I don't want to deal with this." Like, they've been doing it; they just keep coming. You get vulnerability fatigue, that kind of thing. I know we'll dive into it, but you talk a lot about scaling AppSec. I'm curious before we dive into some specific questions. What exactly does it mean to scale AppSec when you think about it in the organizational context? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, that's a great question. The challenge that most organizations have is that security does not scale at the same progression as the engineering teams. So if you hire 100 engineers, you might hire one or two security folks. And it's really hard to do all of the right things for an organization if you're always falling behind and not having that same sort of growth. So when I think about scaling security, it's really thinking about programs that you've built and structured that are in such a great shape that it doesn't matter how many engineers that you add, you don't have to. The amount of operational work doesn't scale linearly, so it sort of levels off at some point. So when I think about scaling security tooling programs, it doesn't matter if you have 1,000 engineers or 5,000 engineers. The amount of operational work doesn't really go up too much as you add more folks. So that's how I really think about scaling security. And the other aspect of it is a lot of the times we do security well in pockets of the organization. It's really trying to build a minimum baseline for the entire organization and sort of build up to where you should be with all of the org itself.
Yeah, I like that. I like the rising tide kind of analogy is the way I think of it, the way you just put that. So you talked about vulnerability management. So I'll start us there. Everyone's favorite topic, right? Everyone loves vulnerability management. And given you've been so focused on AppSec, you've been around to see the push of, shift security left as we hear it, which often means tooling in the pipeline and SaaS and DAS and secret scanning infrastructure, as code scanning, you name it, right? And all of these things start to produce findings or noise, as some people like to call them. And often this equates to in practice like kind of burdening our development peers, with a lot of findings, and they have to sift through these findings and determine what's what and what actually needs to be prioritized. And they see us as a blocker of going to production, that kind of thing. How have you navigated kind of integrating all the tools that we're talking about without necessarily just drowning our peers with findings?
Yeah, earlier in my career, I've seen some of the security engineers just what they do is for every vulnerability discovered, they would actually create a vulnerability ticket, and then you'd have tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of vulnerabilities. At one particular company, Jira slowed down because there's so many vulnerability tickets. We were DOSing our Jira instance from a security standpoint. And I have a lot, and I could talk about this for days, for vulnerability management, I actually have a crawl, walk, run, sprint methodology when it comes to vulnerabilities. And security tooling itself, I think the goal ultimately is to have engineering fix vulnerabilities. So you don't want to dump everything on their plate and not get anything done. So with crawl, what you do is you fully integrate the tool in your ecosystem. It has to be 100%. You have to have coverage metrics. You must pull the data out of the security tool into your central security data lake so that you can actually do analysis and figure out how you want to move forward with really eliminating classes of vulnerabilities. But also, you want to make those that dashboard or analysis available to the engineering team. So there are always proactive engineering teams that want to know how well they're doing, and they'll actually start fixing things on their own. With Walk, you want to actually start auto creating and auto closing vulnerability tickets. And again, I don't want to add all of the vulnerabilities. So there are some security tools that talk about this is a critical vulnerability and it has a mature exploit. So add those. Once you have a real good handle on it, then just start adding the critical vulnerabilities that don't have mature exploits. So always slowly raise the bar when it comes to that. The run methodology is like, now let's start gating. Not all let engineers allow them to add critical or high vulnerabilities into the ecosystem. And then in certain scenarios, the sprint it depends on the type of tool, but they can allow for auto patching. I know that people get afraid about auto patching, but like if you have the strong tests that are available, it's easier for. I want to decouple engineer from even thinking about doing that work, and they just get it for free if they use this methodology.
Yeah, like it's kind of a maturity model, right? Which we know in cybersecurity we're big fans of for sure. So you talked about one thing you said that caught my attention was like eliminating classes of vulnerabilities, and we've seen a lot of discussion about that lately around shifting to secure programming languages or kind of embracing the secure by design approach. And I know you've done a lot of talks around things like threat modeling as well too. Can you speak a little bit about your experience and success and challenges of like getting development teams to take a step back and try to do some threat modeling, address systemic vulnerabilities rather than just kind of tackling the same type of ticket over and over, kind of getting to that systemic weakness or vulnerability?
Yeah, uh, a lot of our organizations that have been at we do play whack-a-mole with certain type of vulnerabilities. Earlier in my career, it was a lot with XSS and finding XSS vulnerabilities. There's no framework level fix for it, but now like with React and other languages and frameworks available, it makes it a lot easier. So it's great to do analysis and understand the type of vulnerabilities that you have. I remember at one organization, we were really bad at server-side request forgery. And what ended up happening is that security worked really closely with engineering for a couple of ways. One is we built a library that folks should be using in part of the ecosystem. And then we started scanning our code to find where potential weaknesses can happen when it comes to server-side request forgery. So over time, we were able to eliminate most places. We did occasionally find certain issues through our bug bounty program, but people knew that if they use this library, they don't have to worry about things. And if there was a bug with the library, it wasn't their problem. The security and engineering teams will work together to sort of eliminate that bug itself. So when you have a paved path and you can point people to the paved path, they inherit a ton of security requirements controls for free. So they're not all the time you can use the paved path. There's some certain situations where you have to go off the paved path and do your own customized things for it. But it really encourages folks to use the paved path and the direction that most of the organization is going. When you can say that, okay, I get 80% of my security controls for free if I use it, and I only have to implement 20%. But if I have to do something very customized, the security team is going to be working really closely with me to make sure that I implement all of the security controls. So it definitely discourages people to go off the paved path there.
Yeah, I like that. I've been an advocate of what you're talking about too, which is kind of establishing guardrails over gates, and kind of like a safe way for engineering teams to move out, inherit security controls, and optimize the way they operate without less, with less friction. I wanted to ask you as well, there's a lot of functional categories, SaaS, SCA, DAS, all these tools, right? And we're often looking to, look for the best tool or the tool for the best use, or, whatever the case is. In your experience of working with AppSec teams, how have you kind of worked around, navigating, selecting the right tool, whether open source or proprietary, and then actually integrating them, tuning them, optimizing them, especially when the team is already stretched thin in many cases, to do a lot of those activities. How have you navigated that?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to the pay path for a second. And we talked a little bit about scaling as well. By focusing on your pay path, you can really scale your security controls and abilities as well. So that's, as we talk about scaling, that's a great way of thinking of that. With respect to tools, yeah, tooling is hard. Tooling is really hard on the security side, especially since like security tool is not cheap either. You can spend thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of dollars on security tools themselves. And every capability has a uniqueness to it. So always love creating a rubric beforehand, and always thinking of the customer in mind. And so the customer is mostly for AppSec folks, it is the engineers themselves. So what I love doing is involving engineering as part of our POCs. So imagine SCA. There are maybe dozens, if not hundreds, of security tools out there that for software composition analysis. They all say that they are the best in the community and industry. You build out your rubric of what exactly you're looking for as part of a tool. Maybe it's going to be particular languages and frameworks that you have mostly in your ecosystem. But if you're really thinking about putting the customer shoes on, you want to make sure that the engineers have a good experience. So DevX, we usually call it on the development side. You want to make sure that they have a strong security experience with the tool itself. So, which means you want to have low false positives. So when it comes to SCA tools, they're notorious for not telling you if that they know that that library is vulnerable, but it won't tell you if your code will be using that part of the library. So some of the newer tools have reachability, which is fantastic and reduces that noise and the busy work that you assign to engineers themselves. So you want to make sure that one, you want to really partner with your engineering team, get them to POC things. Also, I know that we overuse the term of shifting left. You still have to shift left as well, where the goal is that I'm pushing a lot of the vendors these days. I need comments on PRs, on GitHub PRs, because that's where my engineers are. That's where the least amount of context switching happens. I don't want to find something when they're actually building the package that we're going to be pushing to production. That might take 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. By that time, the engineer is doing something else. But if you're commenting on a PR, it might be 10, 15 seconds before you see those comments. They're still there. They're still looking at their PR themselves. And if you can provide that commentary right away, they can make those changes, and it's very low friction itself. So we didn't really talk about the actual capabilities of the tool itself, but it's really important to make sure that the customers, the ones that are actually going to be fixing these vulnerabilities, are really enjoying the experience that they have with the tools. And over time, you will see a lot fewer vulnerabilities in general, because they're not bypassing the tool, or they're not trying to avoid fixing things in itself.
Yeah, just real quick, a couple things you're saying that I really want to emphasize is you're referring to your developer peers as the customers. And I like that, because security is serving the business ultimately. And you're trying to empower developers who are typically writing code that drives business value, revenue, features, velocity, things like that. You're referring to them as customers. And I think that goes a long way of building rapport and trust and empathy and building that relationship with those counterparts, rather than them seeing you as a blocker or a friction point, which is critical to having a mature AppSec program, in my opinion and experience. And you're also emphasizing developer experience, which is key, because you're trying to empower them with the right tools and let them kind of, you build it, you own it, right? You get to own this and be responsible for things, for better or worse, and that can be a good or a bad thing depending on how you look at it. And I wanted to ask you, you talked about tools. We've seen a lot of innovative, open source software tooling come out recently, and even in some cases be more promising than maybe proprietary options in some cases. And you talked about maintaining tools and things like that. And so I'm curious, from the open source versus proprietary options, how have you typically navigated that? And I've seen some cases where like open source is appealing because we can save money, but then you have to maintain it. You have to maybe actually start to contribute back to it. Like there's things to be said about that. And then maybe it lacks enterprise features, for example, or it's hard to scale it across the enterprise beyond certain development teams or things like that. So I'm curious your experience and perspective on kind of open source versus proprietary security tooling too.
Yeah, I think I also want to add one more flavor into it, is also building yourself as well. So there are certain situations where you need to build tools for yourself. So yeah, I'm hoping that not too many vendors are listening to this. I do rely on vendors a lot. I'm going to get a lot more spam from vendors now. But like most situations that I do, I look at vendors first, because ultimately I want to build a team that is more looking to scale. And I don't want my engineers to be spending a lot of time maintaining, building on top of these sort of open source tools, or even the tools in-house. But I will look at everything at a case-by-case basis. We'll create a rubric for things. A great example of this is when I was working at Twilio, one of my security engineers, Alejandro, one of the things that we want to build out is we want to centralize all of our security data tooling into a central data lake. So we looked around, we didn't find any sort of player or open source in that space. So we actually built it out. So all security engineer had to do was create a Lambda, which sucks the data from the API, and through our framework that Alejandro called Multivac, it would go through all of these systems and have your data in Tableau. So you can actually create dashboards on the data that you get, and you can cross-aggregate it with other tooling data in itself. So sometimes you have to buy, sometimes there's open source. I've known, like in the past, we've used Trufflehog to find secrets. And sometimes you go with a vendor. So and sometimes I pulled out Trufflehog and started using Trufflehog as a vendor itself, and get them to do the secret scanning for me. So yeah, overall, like I typically rely a little bit more on vendors because I want my team to focus on scaling and building solutions to scale with the business. And it's a lot easier to yell at vendors than my teammates.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about is so important because it does depend. It depends on what your team has the bandwidth to focus on in terms of maintaining tools or even building tools. Many organizations may not have the expertise and resources to even build a tool, but then they also may not have the funding to go out and get an enterprise tooling. Such as it's a really complicated dichotomy in many cases. It really does depending on the situation, the tool, the use case, things like that. So I like that aspect of it. One thing I want to ask you too is you've been, blessed to be surrounded by some amazing teams, like you've talked about. Behind all the technology and tools and things like that, there's the people. How have you approached kind of building an application security team?
Yeah, with a lot of difficulties. So, AppSec teams are fantastic, and there are so many different flavors of individuals. But what I really focus on when building teams is it's an application security engineer, and a focus on the engineer part of it. So I'm looking at folks, and doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be able to code. It helps if they are able to code, but the engineer, when I say engineer, I'm looking for people that are willing to solve very complicated problems and breaking it down into small pieces and chipping away at the problem themselves. So some of the people that I've hired in the past are very strong with program management or process heavy. Some people are very strong offensive security engineers that really are looking at the engineering and breaking down of these large problems. And I've hired a lot of great software engineers themselves. So whenever I look to hire an application security engineer, I have typically three buckets that I sort of look at them at. So the first bucket is the application security skills. They actually have to be able to threat model. They got to be able to run a bug bounty. They got to be able to get a vendor to do your pen testing, that sort of thing. So just traditional application security skills. The second bucket is influence. We need soft skills because we're not doing all the work. It's impossible for security engineers to fix all the vulnerabilities ourselves. So we have to be able to influence the individuals, the managers, the directors, potentially some of these individuals be even talking to VPs and making sure that they are doing the right things. And with influence, with those soft skills, you should be also be very good at creating content for training and delivering training as well. Because again, with scaling, you want to be able to teach as many people and get them to do that right job. The last bucket is actually the software engineering part of it as well. I don't expect them to release production ready code, but definitely good enough to help us scale internal programs. So building out either our internal frameworks or building out automation to really help us scale. So those are the three buckets. At the higher levels, I actually have a fourth bucket, and is that program management. So a lot of the times, these senior staff or principal level application security engineers, they're going to be running 9-month, 12-month, 18-month long programs. And you need a lot of skills to be having that focus and drive to actually eliminate whatever class of vulnerability you're working on or whatever rolling out that program. So being able to hold other people accountable and holding yourself accountable to a really high standard of delivering these programs, it's super important. So those are sort of like the four buckets I usually hire for application security engineers.
Yeah, that's an excellent framework. I think it's a great blend of, the technical knowledge from a security perspective, the software knowledge, right? Because you need to work with the development peers and understand how they work, and writing code, at least at a fundamental level. You have to understand how to like kind of lead an engagement and an effort from a program management perspective. And then you have to be able to train and enable and empower people. So you really nailed it with that. I love that framework that you laid out.
Yeah, one
One thing
thing I forgot
go
to
ahead.
mention as well is that obviously we have an interview process that will help find all these things. The first thing I do with my hiring manager interview is I got to make sure that folks have empathy. Like that's the skill that I'm looking for. If these folks have strong empathy, obviously we're going to take a look at their technical skills and your soft skills. But if you have empathy, you're going to be empowering developers, but you also be strengthening the team itself. We've built out a lot of great teams. With Twilio was a great example where I would find individuals that will help each other make sure that the gaps that the other people have, they will help and train and help individuals within our team to get stronger and deliver more and be better at what they do. So the empathy part was just a huge focus for me building out a lot of these teams.
Yeah, that's absolutely critical, especially like, not obviously within the team among your peers as you're working in a security perspective, but with the developers as well. Like I've seen a lot of cases in security where we just dump things on engineers and development and say, hey, figure it out. Like we don't care what else you have going on or whether this is a priority for you or not. Like, and that's not going to get you anywhere. It's not going to be a successful strategy. So you have to understand, what's driving people, what's incentivizing them, how are they incentivizing the organizational context, and empathize with other things they have going on. To us, security is the most important thing in the world, but it's not the case for most other people in other roles. So I really like that piece too. I wanted to ask you, you've had, several different roles, different organizations, around AppSec. And I imagine you've come into situations where you come into a team and you have some great resources. Other cases, you may have to go out and seek out additional team members. You maybe have some budget to hire new people or whatever the case is. How have you kind of navigated determining like the team's core capabilities and competencies and where those gaps are, whether you look internal versus external, or you kind of invest in existing resources, that kind of thing?
Oh man, that's a spicy question. Yeah, that's a hard one to answer, and it changes from company to company. I really like this question. So, first thing I do is actually I join a team and I listen. So I don't know what's going on. I set up weekly one-on-ones with everyone on the team, understand who they are, understand the problems that they're encountering within the organization, understand the risks that are in organization as well, and just make sure that I'm just there, just trying to understand what's going on, not making any assumptions or bringing any of my baggage to the conversation as well. And I also want to understand what the folks are enjoying doing as part of the team. So some of the better managers that I've had in my career, what they end up doing is making sure that the people that enjoy certain items, they work a lot more on it and they get a lot more done just in general. So first thing is always just listen, and then figure out what are the major problems that I need to fix within the organization as well. So it could be process related. It could be just gaps within our SDL, security development lifecycle. It could be just what are if the people that we have are the right people, just in general that we want to move forward with, and it could be a mixture of all of that. And then Sometimes they are the right people. So I'm very blessed with the team here at Rippling. Everyone is very strong at what they do, and will be building on top of their success in itself. So everyone's a really strong software developer. They really are passionate about the product, the people themselves. So yeah, but sometimes you don't have the right people, and that part is really challenging. I've talked about that in the past. It's really important to understand who are not the right people within your team and why aren't they the right people. So if it's a technical gap, not a big deal. You work with them and you work through their technical problems. If it's more of a attitude gap, maybe you sort of outline it, say, hey, this is not how we approach developers. We have to come with empathy. We have to partner with them. We're not we don't want to be the doctor no and saying nothing, saying no for every situation. And so those might be rectified, but unfortunately, some situations things won't be rectified, and you have to look at sort of managing certain individuals out of the organization. But vast majority of the people that I've worked with in my career, they're always been, and engineers are really proud of the stuff that they do. So application security engineers, actual development engineers, they're very proud of the work that they put out. And most people just want to get better and be able to deliver more anyway. So I've been very fortunate in my career that most of the people have been people that I can work really closely with and help them get to where they need to go with their careers as well.
Yeah, it's really such an excellent answer, and it goes well beyond AppSec. At least, in my experience of having good managers and good leaders, is they don't show up with all the answers on the first day. They show up, they listen, and they understand, like, what do you enjoy doing? What do you not enjoy doing? They understand, I need to learn the broader organizational context and politics that this individual may know that I need to learn about before I just come in and try to make some changes, right? And those are really great lessons. And it takes me to my next question to you is, you seemed, and I may mischaracterize this, so let me know, but you recently, I thought it looked like you moved to kind of an IC role, and then you got pulled back to leadership. Leadership just wouldn't let you be. You got pulled back to management and leadership type roles. First off, why do you think that is, and how have you enjoyed, kind of being in that leadership role versus individual contributor, and what made you take that leap right to IC and then now get pulled back?
I lasted 6 weeks, Chris, 6 weeks as an IC. So this was just a unique situation where my predecessor, he got an opportunity he couldn't refuse. So he moved on, and it made most sense for me to just take over the team in general. So I think when it was earlier in my career, I feel I've always felt that I'm an engineer at heart. I always wanted to build things in self, and graduated, started building software in companies, and then eventually got promoted to a manager, engineering manager, and then started building teams. And as I got higher within an organization, what I really found that I'm really passionate about is actually building people's careers and really helping people get to where they want to go. And I think that sort of shows just in general, um, they may be working with me for 6 months, a year, 4 years, but the time that I have with them, I want to make sure I teach them as much as I can. And I've made so many mistakes in my career, and I want to make sure that they avoid the mistakes that I've made just in general. So really want to focus on that sort of situation. And then I think the other specific things that I really enjoyed, especially on the leadership side, is I love building AppSec programs now, and coming into Rippling and sort of sitting down and sort of mapping out the strategy for AppSec over the next 2-3 years and saying, okay, this is where we need to do, where we need to go, and this is where we need to be. We have a lot of sensitive information at this organization, and this is how we need to approach it, and this is the order in which we should be doing things as well. That's always been a lot of fun for me, and I've had the luck of doing it last a few companies themselves. So, but I see work is great too. So I made that conscious decision moving as away from being a director of product security at Twilio to becoming a staff security engineer at Rippling, mostly because I really missed being technical and hands-on. I felt that my team was having so much fun doing that, and I've always enjoyed that as part of my career. So those 6 glorious weeks of being an IC, I got to. My focus was the bug bounty program at Rippling, and we were able to exhaust the bug bounty money pool that we had in a very short time. So yeah, I think that was so much fun for me, just being able to dive deep into the program and just deal with the problems themselves.
That's too funny. I'm sure in some regard, maybe the CFO was like, "Oh yeah, get that guy out of there. He's burning up all of our capital." So I want to ask you, like, it is difficult, I imagine, for someone who enjoys being technical. And I ask this of a lot of security leaders. How do you balance that dichotomy of staying technical enough, right, to understand your team, what they're working on, the context within the organization, guide them in many cases, and help them learn. But you also need to have the management, the leadership aspect. So especially for someone who really enjoys the technical side, how do you try to balance that, given you don't get the time that you would love to really dig in and keep those skills sharp in some cases?
Yeah, I remember both at Twilio and now also at Rippling, I've told my boss, I do not want any more promotions. Like this is it. Like a director level, it's fine because at the director level, there's when you go into leadership, there's a scope and there's power. So the higher you go up, the more power you have, but the narrower your scope of impacting the day-to-days of individuals. At the director level, I feel it's the right amount. Like I have enough power, I can make the influence where the roadmap is and where we want to go, and also am able to dive into problems and help folks with problems themselves. So definitely do not want any more promotions. This is the right level for me where I can actually do the right type of influence and I can dive bomb into certain problems. But like I do get challenges. Like I do miss getting my hands on my keyboard and writing automation or writing. I was coding for 10 years before I switched over onto the security side. So I really miss pushing out production grade code and being able to do that sort of stuff. So I too, if anyone has solutions, definitely let me know as well. But especially on the earlier side of programs, I spend a lot more time very high level and really coaching, mentoring individuals to sort of think the same way that I think about scale and programs themselves. And later on, when the program is a lot better, more established, I get to take some time for myself to actually go closer and deeper to certain problems and work with the individuals to solve those problems. I still don't get to put my hands on a keyboard, but like I do get closer to working with individuals and working through the problems there themselves.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's no perfect answer, and it's always going to be challenging depending on the circumstances. But it seems like you found kind of that right role that lets you exert enough, influence to drive things in the way you think makes sense, but get to be close enough to the problems to keep context and knowledge and expertise and such as well. I'm curious, in a fast-moving field like AppSec, with cloud and software supply chain and open source and all these, tools and all the things to keep track of, what are some of the resources you use, from a learning perspective? What do you regularly find yourself, reading, consuming, that kind of thing?
Yeah, my first VP of security when I switched over from engineering to security, he was fantastic in that he told me, Jeevan, I come with the infra security or cloud security background. I'm not going to be really able to help you with AppSec. And what I can do is I can put you in touch with people with AppSec capabilities in my network, but you really have to build your own network and rely on that. And I took that to heart and I went to my first Black Hat conference, and he put me in touch with so many people. I started talking and understanding and realizing how little I knew about application security there. I still don't know much. I still feel that I'm still on my journey of learning more and more. But I've really focused a lot more on building a network and being able to, if I have a question about how do I how do I think about risk at a larger macro level, I'll reach out to my friend Jacob at Snowflake and start picking his mind and sort of understanding how they set up their programs. And if we're talking about certain type of application security scaling, it's like I have a strong network in which I'm not afraid to ask them questions so that they are able to provide me. So it's impossible to keep track of all the things that are coming. It's so beyond a fire hose. It's like a river of information that we have to sift through. But really working closely with your network and your friends and building that community, your community up, it really makes it easier for you to sort of dive deep into specific problems and understand how other companies solve it. Doesn't necessarily mean you're going to solve it the same way, but it at least gives you a direction of how other folks have done it.
Yeah, I agree. Having that network of peers that you can learn from in every area of expertise, because it's so vast. There's no way you'll be an expert in all the things, but you can at least know someone who has chosen to focus and specialize in something, and you can lean on them and ask questions and learn from them, things like that. So that'll bring us to our last question that I ask everyone on the show is, what does the term cyber resilience mean to you?
Yeah. I think what it really resonates with me is like being able to being in cybersecurity, infosec. It's hard. It's hard and it's draining and difficult. And being cyber resilient in my mind is being able to get past the challenges that we have day to day as being security engineers and really being able to methodically like build our careers and be able to be resilient to some of the changes and challenges that we see all the time. So cyber resilient to me is just more about being able to survive in our industry in itself.
Very cool. I like how it's from the career perspective rather than necessarily the technical or system context. So Jeevan, we covered a lot of ground, tools, technologies, growing teams, maturing into a leadership role, guiding teams and staying up to date on evolving technologies and methodologies and things like that. So that'll wrap us up for today. Thank you so much for coming on, and thanks to everyone who tuned in.
Yeah, thank you. This was a blast, Chris. I had a lot of fun, a couple of spicy questions, which is always a lot of fun to answer.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Take care.